Hey kids, howdy and welcome. It is June, the month of June. You have tuned in to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology, and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox, and we're talking about June 3rd through the 9th. And I promise not to come onto every podcast and sort of freak out about how fast time is going this year, because I think we did that last week as well. But we start, as we always do, with a question. Keep your questions coming, kids. I love teaching, and this is actually a question specifically about the podcast being a teaching experience. So send your questions to me, and I will answer them on the podcast. This is a question from Frankie, and Frankie writes to us, Dear Michael and Zoe, I love the podcast so much, and mostly because of what I learned. I had a reading many years ago where I learned that Pluto in my chart is what she called a final dispositor. She put that in quotes.
That is not a word I've heard before.
Right. It's not something I talk a lot about, but this is actually a good opportunity to both teach something, but also explain why I back off of some of the technical stuff in astrology. It'll be clear as I answer the question. So, yes, final dispositor. I literally got out my notes from that reading to make sure I was remembering correctly. She seemed to indicate it was important. What is this, and what does it mean? Okay. So, one of the principles in astrology has to do with the qualities of energy that each sign sort of generates and embodies. Rulership is one of the primary ways that we work with this idea of signs having certain meaning, in that every sign is thought to be ruled by a planet. So, for example, this is a good thing to talk about now because Mars is in the sign of Aries, his ruling sign. So every planet has a sign that it rules. Then there's this thing called disposition in astrology. And it's literally the way we use disposition in life. Like someone's disposition is kind of synonymous with their mood, right? So a sign can give a mood to a planet by virtue of moving through it. So for example, because Mars rules Aries, any planet, including the moon, moving through the sign of Aries is going to get its disposition, its mood, from Mars. So if you have Venus in Aries, the disposition of your Venus placement will be very Mars-like. Are you following this?
Mm-hmm.
Is this making sense? Okay. So you can look at a chart and all of the planets and all of the signs that they're in, and you can get some information about how a person operates. So if Mercury is how they operate from the neck up in terms of perception and communication, the sign that Mercury is in will give that person's communication a certain disposition, right? So if someone's got Mercury in Taurus and Venus rules Taurus, their communications disposition comes from Venus. So that's pretty simple to cognate, I think, for most people. That every sign has a ruling planet, and another planet in that sign gets its mood from the person who rules the mansion. It's kind of like going to someone's house. You may be you, but you go to someone's house and you follow their rules.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
That's perfect. Like in my house, you take your shoes off.
Yeah.
That's the disposition. Mars and Aries would be like, fuck, I'm not taking my shoes off, except that my house is a Taurus house, honey. You're going to take your shoes off. All right, great. I'm glad we landed on that. That's a good thing about for context to people understanding this. So a final dispositor in a chart indicates that a chart has one planet that seems to rule over the whole chart because it's the only planet in the chart in its own ruling sign. So I have Mercury in Virgo. That's a ruling sign and an exaltation, but it's not the final dispositor of my chart because I have Sun in Leo. Leo rules the Sun. I have Saturn in Aquarius. It was a classical ruler of Saturn. But someone who has a final dispositor of Pluto, first of all, they're going to be born from like November of 1983 through November of 1995. Because that's when the planet Pluto was in his ruling sign of Scorpio. Isn't that your generation?
It is, yeah, I'm 93, so.
So the millennial generation all have the planet of change and transformation, Pluto, in its ruling sign of Scorpio. So that means that anybody born from like November 6th, 1983 through like November 10th, 1995 has Pluto in its ruling sign. So that would mean that during that like 12-year period, Pluto's movement through Scorpio was fast. Doesn't spend the same amount of time in every sign. So that means that while Pluto was in Scorpio, if you were born at a moment where no planets were in their ruling signs, you will have Pluto as your final dispositor.
Okay.
Now, this would be the case of anybody. Like if I had Mercury in Virgo, ruling sign, but I didn't have Saturn in a ruling sign or the Sun in a ruling sign, we would call my chart having a final dispositor of Mercury. Right? So the reason I'm putting out this generation is because Frankie's question is definitely puts her in that generation. She's got Pluto in Scorpio if she's got Pluto as a final dispositor. So what does it mean to have a final dispositor? It means that your whole embodiment has a kind of connection to that quality of energy. A planet in its own ruling sign gives itself its disposition. That's what it is to be in its ruling sign. So that's what it means to identify that a planet has a final dispositor, that you have one planet in its ruling sign and no other planets in their own ruling signs. Now, I find this to be very dense information, and I cannot think possibly what the fucking value would be. Except maybe to talk about the millennial generation as a generation that's creating great change and transformation on the planet because they are the generation through which change and transformation took place in your very embodiment.
Yeah.
You are the Pluto and Scorpio generation. So I find this information interesting, but not valuable.
Okay.
So I don't work with it a lot as an astrologer. You know, I'll throw this in there for the nerds out there. In the idea of this rulership and disposition and whatnot, every sign is not only ruled by a planet, but it has sub-ruling planets for the first 10, the second 10, and the third 10.
That's too much for me to think
Yeah.
about.
Right? So it's like, I know lots of astrologers who would be like, oh, you've got to look at the disposition. And it's like, oh my fucking God, what would be the value? You'd literally fall into a myopic hole of data and miss the value of astrology being a contextualizing experience that sort of reflects who you are.
Yeah.
But if you get too lost in all of this extra data, I don't think you're using astrology in the way that I find astrology to be valuable.
Yeah.
So hopefully this taught a few things and sort of also illuminated a little bit why I'm the kind of astrologer that I am. I'm going to take a moment to do a little shameless plug. I've got a class starting this weekend, one of my favorite classes to teach. I started teaching shadow work to just help people understand that there's incredible growth that can happen when you start turning within and taking responsibility for every trigger that you have. And then I thought, how can we go deeper with this self-investigation work? And I found that because we vibrate so powerfully with myths and fairy tales, I think that they are an incredible contextualizing way to do a deep dive. So it's shadow work in my Going Deeper classes, but we focus specifically on the themes that rise up with Little Red Riding Hood and the rape of Medusa. Very powerful stories that talk about sensuality and passion and sexuality and the male gaze and what it's like to be in this modern world with all of this crazy stuff going on. I love this class. It's 4 weeks on Saturday, lots of homework, and it's a deep dive. Head over to michaellennox.com, click the classes button, and read all about it. This class might just be for you. Gemini, 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 Gemini. This season is all about Gemini, and today it just got more intense. So, Sun's in Gemini. We're in the Gemini mansion. We're about halfway through that process. We got a new moon in Gemini coming up later this week. But something that happens today that amplifies that we're in this neck up mental perception land is that Mercury, the planet that rules Gemini, has moved into his home turf, or will move into his home turf of Gemini today. I think it happens in the afternoon Pacific time, so that means tomorrow, Tuesday, when we wake up into a world where the sun is in Gemini, putting our conscious awareness in the direction of our ideas, our impulses to connect and share with others. Jupiter's there for the next 13 months, so it's the area where the most expansion is going to take place, not only now and in this new moon that's coming, but for the next, 13 months. Venus is in Gemini right now, so even our emotional body is responding to mind and thought and an intellectual ability to describe a feeling experience, and that's very valuable. And by the time today is over, Mercury is there as well. That's a lot of Gemini energy, kids. So let me say that this week, the new moon has a lot of power to be deeply connected to what you're thinking, what your ideas are that are driving your life, and the need to share them with others and create intentions we set that allow for that to be a part of what drives us. There's always going to be the shadow of anxiety and overthinking and monkey mind, and that's going to increase as a possibility when you have the sun and Mercury both in Gemini. And so just be on a general sort of lookout for overthinking, anxiety, and monkey mind as a result. Mercury spends 2.5 weeks in every sign. So it's a fast jaunt. Mercury's in his free and clear period, so there's no retrograde in sight. And it's his ruling sign, which means we are going to be, in fact, clearer, more perceptive, more direct in our ability to take what we're perceiving inside of us and put it into words out of our mouth and share with others for deep understanding. So it's a valuable transit and comes with a little warning, a lot of air. Now, there's something that's happening. I'm really going to call this a tomorrow thing, Tuesday through June 7th, right? That's after the new moon. So from tomorrow, Tuesday, through Friday the 7th, Venus and the sun are traveling together. Venus is in Gemini, right? So that means that we're processing our feelings in an intellectual level. We're able to share what we're feeling more directly because deeper feels don't get in the way, and Gemini is all about that. Like Gemini wants to share. Venus wants to share because it's the planet of love. So to have Venus and the sun coming together means that we're moving through an alignment of our conscious awareness, the sun, and how we're giving and receiving love, Venus. Because of Venus's speed, she's going to catch up with the sun, and for a handful of days, they're going to appear to move together so that the conjunction of sun and Venus, which I'm going to say, opens our conscious awareness to love in all forms more directly. And because it's happening in Gemini, we get to do this as a mental exercise, which I think is easier for most human beings to understand love and feelings when a little mind is present and not interfering with our emotional process.
Right.
And all week long, we have this thread of greater emotional insight, greater relational awareness right there in our perceptions and our ability to share.
Mm.
A lot of healing going on the last couple of months, a lot of Venus stuff and that I share about every week. This is sort of the first moment that I'm noticing that some of the deep dives of the last handful of months are going to start showing up in our thoughts and our perceptions and our ability to share about what we're going through emotionally. That's maybe been deep and behind the scenes for a little while, and we might be able to see some relief by being able to speak up about what our hearts have been feeling.
So we're able to share what we've been marinating on, kind of.
That's a perfect way of putting it, Zoe.
Yeah.
Now, I'm clearly speaking about my own experience here because the last few months I've been going through some deep personal transits that have been triggering wound and anxiety and depression and, Saturn's on my Chiron, Chiron's opposing my moon. I'm in it. And the last 3 months have been a real marinade in a pressure cooker. And so, yes, I'm looking forward to having a lighter experience next week because of the marination of the past months. And I think Venus and Sun together in Gemini for 5 days can help create that. And it leads us right up to the new moon in Gemini. All right, kids, new moon in Gemini is June 6th. Looks like it's about 5:40 a.m. that Thursday Pacific time, so it's very early in the day on Thursday. And I feel like in some ways we've sort of set you up to have an understanding of what this new moon is, just having talked about Gemini for the last, few minutes in the podcast. We are in the mansion of sharing our ideas. We've been marinating in some stuff, as we always are. And I encourage you to look to the Gemini house in your natal chart if you know it, not only for this new moon, because the new moon's going to trigger that house in your chart's consciousness and sensibility, but also because Jupiter has moved into Gemini for the next 13 months. And that means that the next year has expansion happening specifically in the Gemini sensibility. In some ways, that makes this new moon and the intentions you set all the more important to be connected to all the ways you want your life to expand and grow. In fact, you could even call a new moon in Gemini the kind of expand and grow new moon, because we have an understanding that that which we focus on grows. Quantum physics tells us the observer creates the consciousness itself, that an particle turns into a wave when you look at it. It becomes potential when you look at it. So same thing with thought and mind. And so a new moon in Gemini is about saying, I'm going to align my thoughts and perceptions in the direction of this thing that I desire. And Jupiter's presence in this mansion says, yes, we can expand anything in that direction of your life for the next, 12, 13 months. And we sort of set those intentions starting now. Now, of course, because the sun and the moon and Venus are exactly conjunct, or close enough to exactly conjunct. Well, no, it's exact. It's 16 degrees. 16 degrees of Gemini has the sun and the moon, making it a new moon. But Venus is also exactly at 16 degrees as well. So that means the new moon itself has a profound ability to start up a new chapter that's centered very much in your heart. Right? What does your heart desire? The heart has just spent 5 days hanging out with our conscious awareness of the sun. It's like a pre-meeting. It's like, think of it as this week is like 4 or 5 days of like thinking about what you want to focus on, figuring it all out, mentally aligning with what you want to sort of create next. And if you know the house that Gemini rules in your chart, you can even fine tune it even more and just know that the new moon allows us to create a new cycle that's very heart-driven, but also takes into account all the perceptions that you have of your life and your heart and your desires that are cleaner and clearer because of the healings of the last few months. Meanwhile, Mercury having just moved into Gemini, he's still pretty close to Jupiter during the new moon on Thursday. They are only about 4 degrees apart. That means our minds are feeling wildly expansive and filled with possibility. You can even overdo things when that's Jupiter's excess is his shadow, right? And so one might say, well, watch out for overthinking or being too lofty with your intentional goals. And I say, no, go big and let life correct you. Like, let the enthusiasm drive what you desire. Life will let you know whether what you're intending is something that the universe can or will support. There's an almost exact sextile between the sun, moon, and Venus and the nodes of the moon. So the nodes of the moon reflect the collective movement where we're all going sort of at the same time. So a new moon that dials in with a trine to the south node means that we're easily moving away from the past as we enter this next lunar cycle. And a sextile, 60-degree angle from the new moon to the north node means if we put some effort in, 60-degree angles require effort. If and as we put effort in, we can usher our lives forward towards our North Star because the geometry of the new moon dials so powerfully in to that collective point, the nodes that show us, yes, we are all moving forward, and in some ways at the same time and in the same way with our brothers and sisters. Now, the only real challenging geometry in this new moon is a square to Saturn. Okay, so Saturn is the taskmaster, the teacher, and squares are conflict and obstacle geometry. So this new moon is not without its sort of shadowy, challenging aspects. And a square to Saturn means it could be mighty for some, right? Mighty breakdowns and challenges at this moment because the teacher is in the house. Now, I'll throw in on the side that Jupiter the expander is still holding a trine with Pluto, the lord of the underworld, during this new moon, which means our capacity to grow in a Jupiterian way has all the power, authority, and gravitas of Pluto to help us make our desires become made manifest on the planet. That is a huge positive, expansive, cash and prizes transit that's part of this new moon for sure. But it's also squaring Saturn. So that means you can't have the thing you don't feel deserving of. That means that you might have that. Remember, just a few minutes ago, I said, go big and let the universe correct you. That is supported in this lunar cycle because you got a go big transit of Jupiter trining Pluto, and then you got and the world might correct you because Saturn's part of this new moon. Saturn is in Pisces, so often the lessons that we have to learn while Saturn is in the sign that invented the unconscious can be maddening because unconscious material is hard to see because it's in the unconscious. So a new moon in Gemini is kind of like, Gemini is sort of the antithesis of the unconscious. It's pure mind thought, above the neck kind of stuff. So somehow a mentally driven, positively expansive new moon in Gemini, because it's got Venus and Jupiter tagging along, is also going to bump us up against our limitations. And so we have to welcome that, right? We have to welcome that in a moment of enthusiasm, we're also bumping into our limits because that's life. So often on social media, people, I think cutely, say things like, well, when's it going to get easier? Or when are you going to say something sort of like only positive? It's like, never.
Right.
Never.
Two sides to everything.
Astrology describes life as it is, not as you want it to be. And so a new moon square Saturn says life is still on life's terms. And if you know your astrology deep enough to know what house in your natal chart is ruled by Pisces, where Saturn is in transit, then you'll have a slightly easier time of understanding what the lesson might be. And I'll just sort of finish off the section by saying, still, I encourage you, go big with your desires and let the universe tell you what's yours right now and what's not quite yours yet. In some ways, the biggest energy of the week will be an ingress. Mars is changing signs on Saturday. I mean, that's not really true. The new moon is just way bigger than an ingress, but it is a big shift in how we're going to feel ourselves moving through life because Mars rules the physical body. And as Mars goes, so does our relationship to our bodies, our actions, our choices, our decision making, our sex life, how we relate to anger. So Mars carries a lot in our sort of physical experience. Mars spends about 6 weeks in each sign, and he's just coming out of a 6-week stay of him in his ruling sign of Aries. And so with Mars in Aries, we're like sort of in a pure experience of embodiment. We're just moving as we move. It doesn't mean we all move in the same way, you understand? But if cosmic Mars is in his home turf, then all of us are experiencing our personal Mars in a kind of pure way. And that when Mars changes signs, we all get a slightly different, to keep with the theme, disposition with how we relate to anger, sex, projects, decisions, goals. Taurus is one of the signs ruled by Venus. So Mars is going to get his disposition from Venus for the 6 weeks that start on June 8th. Now, Venus rules another sign of Libra, and Mars receives his disposition from Venus when he's in Libra, but man, he hates it there. That's a sign of his, detriment. Because it's too harmony and balanced oriented for all that fire. But that is not the case when Mars is in Taurus. What's more likely to happen in your relationship to fire and anger, and that includes your angry reactions as well as like just movement to be effective, Mars in Taurus is going to slow your roll. But remember the bull that is the avatar of Taurus. Bulls just sit and they're immovable. And so as a grounded earth sign, we think of Taurus as the kind of stubborn, immovable energy of that heavy earth sign. Except that bulls charge. So you do want to watch out for that, especially if you're somebody like me who has a nice sort of juicy anger in them, that Mars in Taurus can keep you sort of sated for a while until you explode. But also just the planet of action in the sign receiving disposition from Venus does mean we can move about in a more loving manner when the planet that rules and governs how we're in our bodies and moving about and interacting with others and making choices coming from love, coming from the heart more readily because the planet of action is in that place. The shift happens on Saturday, the 8th, and Mars spends about 6 weeks in that sign. And so that signals a sort of big change. And I would say with all of the air emphasis of Gemini, Mars in Aries has been like a tinderbox for that. Mars in the fiery sign of Aries has been able to light matches over the last 6 weeks. And so when there's lots of air in the atmosphere and Mars in Aries lights a match, we have a fire. So the Gemini mansion still has us very intellectually oriented, but Mars moving into Taurus will ground us, will put us deeper in our heart centers, and I think will go a long way to slow the pace enough to start having a slightly different experience of moving through life. Meanwhile, plant fabulous intentions in the Gemini moon for expansion and sharing your ideas with the world that's just ready and waiting to receive them, and have at it.
Did you know that Michael has a daily astro alert? If you enjoy hearing the weekly astrology, you might like knowing more about each day. When you subscribe for the daily astro alerts, you'll get an in-depth explanation of the day's astrology sent right to your email. Subscriptions are only $10 a month, or you can purchase the yearly subscription at the reduced price of $100. To subscribe, head over to michaellennox.com. All right, it's dream segment time. Every week, Dr. Michael will interpret dreams that are sent in via email or take a live caller. If you would like your dream interpreted on the podcast, you can go ahead and email us at dreams@michaellennox.com. Hopefully your dream will make it onto the show.
This week we have an email in dream, and I thought it was great because we have a little bit of color motifs and fire. So,
Oh, fabulous.
okay. This week we have an email dream from Valerie. And Valerie says, "Thank you for the podcast. I love the outlook on the week. I always feel ready to step into the next chapter with you."
Oh, yay.
So, this dream felt raw and emotional, and she wrote it down the very next day. Her dream goes, "I'm walking in the town square. I know that I'm a citizen of this town, although perhaps a reluctant one. The town square is surrounded by old buildings made out of stone. In the center of the square, rows of women are all lined up. They're standing on the stone-tiled floor, and they're all on fire.
Oh, my.
It's a white fire, and through the flames, I can see their facial expressions and their limbs. They seem to be dancing or moving. I know these women do not belong in this town. We, the town folk, are not to engage with them. But I'm curious, and I'm looking at them. Outside of myself and the women, the square is empty. The leader of the dancing fire women is in the first row on the right. She beckons me, and I know she would like me to hand her the bottle of petrol that's lying on the ground behind me."
Oh, my.
I know, right? This is good. I know I shouldn't, but I follow her wishes. As I hand her the bottle of petrol, she ignites more. The fuel has made her stronger, and her fire changes from white to yellow. I can see her smiling. I'm also happy to see her strength grow. I know I should not be supporting her, but I find myself wanting to. Later, the same women are all lying in the bottom of a canoe, in a row, one behind the other. Their hands are tied. Their leader lies right in the front. They're not burning anymore, but they are our captives, and we're waiting for them to be shipped out of town to a different place. I don't know where, but I assume it's an island offshore, and they'll live in captivity. It's my role to supervise them, to ensure they don't escape on their journey. So, I also lie down in the canoe facing them, and again am face to face with their leader. In order to stop her from running away, I place my hands on both of her upper arms. But just as I enjoy the feel of the strength in her arms, and somehow her power surges through me as well. The end note that she wants to say is the dream was pretty intense and dark, but she wasn't scared for anyone's life and was not hopeless. She was very attracted to the leading woman. She'd love some closure. Best, Valerie.
Damn, Valerie.
Sick dream, Valerie.
Sick dream, Valerie. No. Listen, I'm delighted that we're doing this dream as an email dream. In some ways, I kind of wish Valerie were here because I have a very strong response to this image.
Of the burning
because
or
I
the
have
leader? I
the
found
whole
both
image,
of them.
like
Yeah.
what's happening. Like I have a response to this image that I feel very strongly about, but it's not my dream, it's Valerie's dream, right? So I want to be really clear to everybody that how dream interpretation works is like, I do have a gift. I have an ability to tell you what your dreams mean. People in grad school used to say to me, we're trained not to. And I would look at them and say, yeah, you shouldn't. Right? So I believe in my gift. I trust my gift. But I also have to acknowledge Valerie's not here. This is her dream. I have a suspicion she's going to identify with every fucking thing I say.
Okay.
And Valerie, you can reach out and let us know afterwards. But honey, this is about feminine power and the Christian church murdering millions of women and the loss of that wisdom in our modern world that has created the ability for patriarchy to subjugate women at the wild rate that they've done, because the Christian church started this by moving into Europe and taking the wisdom that these women held for since the beginning of human gatherings and murdered them. So when we live in this modern world and you got all of this Christian nationalism rising up and trad wives and all of this backlash, the feminine power of stewardship of this world has been lost. And if we don't reclaim it, we will not make it. Patriarchal rule has ruined the planet, and only matriarchal rule will survive us and get us into the age of Aquarius. The age of Aquarius is ruled by women. Okay. So how do we know this dream is about that? Well, she's in a town square, so she's in the consciousness of gathered populations. She doesn't say my town. She doesn't say, Bloomfield, New Jersey. She gives a very vague town square, and that image can go back thousands of years of civilization, from the town square I grew up near to another town square, old consciousness. And then the fact that the stone, everything's made of stone, that's a powerful image of ancient.
Yes, very
so we're not in
medieval
Bloomfield, New
vibes.
Jersey. Pardon?
Very medieval vibes.
Yes, very medieval vibes from what I got. I could not have that image of a town square from a time when, in fact, women were being burned alive because they carried wisdom that threatened the church. And so their facial expressions are blissful. They're dancing and moving because they are exhibiting their power for transformation in a white flame. So to me, the white flame is the sacredness of it, right? The purity of white, to me, is about the sacred energy. This will be important when the flame changes color. So there's some interesting information that Valerie gives. One is, she says to us right away, they do not belong in this town. But who's saying that? Mm-hmm. Is that true? Or is that something that Valerie, as the witness of the dream, feels because she's been conditioned to feel aligned with an idea that powerful feminine, principle is something that does not belong here? So I don't think that's Valerie's idea. That's Valerie bumping up against her conditioned response to say that doesn't belong here. Alternative healing methods, spiritual perspectives, all of the feminine principle, wisdom that we've lost. Okay. And the fact that outside of what's happening with them it has an empty square that, again, amplifies the dream image that it's an abstract reflection of something, not a reflection of like day-to-day life, where there would be other thought forms in Valerie's dream. This puts this into the category of big dream, not small dream. So I love the fact that the leader is in the front row on the right? So the right, being the masculine side, says, I lead from the place of action. We're no longer passively knowing that we have this wisdom. We've got to trek on in a masculine way to bring the feminine principle around the world in a more activated way. And so right side says we are ready to move in new ways, as opposed to sitting back and being, which I would interpret if the leader was on the left side. So Valerie's being called to take some action. And in the symbolism of the dream, the action looks like I'm going to light the fire even more. Like, that's an activist's response.
Yeah.
That's young people looking at the United States saying, I'm not going to vote, even if it brings around the Civil War and the revolution, because, I ain't going to wait. I'm throwing petrol on the fire. I'm 60, so I hope it doesn't happen that way. But you understand, Valerie's invitation to light the fire with petrol is a human moment. Now the light goes from white to yellow. That reminds me of sunlight, where true light color is white, but we see the sun as yellow. So to me, and the yellow is the instincts of the third chakra, the gut instincts, the belly, and being driven by your instincts. So that's interesting of yellow light. But to me, mostly it's that she ignites in a human way. She throws petrol. That's a human mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
Human beings invented petrol. So she throws a human invention onto this abstract idea, and it gets bigger, more powerful. Her strength grows. Then she says another one of those sort of like ingrained messages. I know I shouldn't support this. It's like, yeah, I know you think that, but that's the myth. Your job is to light her on fire and understand that it's you that's being lit on fire. Right? So then they captivate them. They're no longer in fire. They're in this whole sort of canoe scene, which I could go into more, but I'm not going to, just for the sake of time. I just say, okay, scene over. There's now a thing where what's happening in the dream is an idea of exile. We're going to exile these people because we really need to not have this energy here. But does Valerie do that? She has an interaction with the leader, grabbing each other's arms, and the power of this figure surges through Valerie, our dreamer. And then she understands, well, you'll let us know, Valerie, if you resonate with what I'm saying, that she understands that she's been activated, that it is her job to take this powerful feminine healing perspective out into her world, her life, to be the best example that she can be of being a woman in her power, so that we can usher in the peace for humanity that the age of Aquarius promises.
Thank you for listening to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. You can find us on Apple Music, the iHeartRadio app, and anywhere you find your favorite shows. Head on over to michaellennox.com for information on astrology readings, the Daily Astro Alert subscription, upcoming classes, and to join the mailing list.